Evolution is the central concept that unifies all of biology, so understanding it is absolutely crucial if you want to understand animal behavior. Evolution and natural selection, one process through which evolution occurs, provide us with a way to answer deep questions about why animals behave the way they do. For example, why an animal might group with others rather than being solitary, or why it chooses more brightly coloured mates, or why it sings to claim a territory. Without evolution, the study of animal behavior would be limited to simply cataloguing what animals did. In the most simple terms, when we talk about biological evolution, we mean descent with modification. This means that individuals pass on their traits to their offspring, but that the distribution of traits within a population changes over time. We can follow this process from generation to generation by looking at changes in the gene frequency of a population, as genes are the main way that traits are passed from parents to offspring. Over many generations, these changes accumulate, leading to new species arising and diverging from each other. Biological evolution is based on the idea that all life on Earth shares a common ancestor that gave rise to the tremendous diversity of animals, plants, and other organisms we see today. Animals alone comprise a vast number of species, more than 67,000 vertebrate species, and over 1.3 million invertebrate species have been discovered since humans started recording them. There are certainly many others still undescribed. All life is related. The question is just a matter of degree. In the same way your parents are a common ancestor between you and your siblings, and your grandparents a common ancestor between you and your cousins, we can identify a common ancestor between us and any other species on Earth. For some species, such as chimpanzees, that now extinct common ancestor lived only a few million years ago, a short time compared to the history of life. To find our common ancestor with all the rest of the primates requires going back tens of millions of years, and the last common ancestor of all mammals probably lived around 160 million years ago. In these terms, our cousins are species like dogs and cats, which are alive now, but are more closely related to each other than either are to us. Species that share more of their evolutionary history should be more similar. So by studying inherited characteristics across species, we can reconstruct their evolutionary relationships. We call these relationships a phylogeny. When reconstructing phylogenies, we need to be careful we look at the right traits, as not all shared traits are a result of inheritance. Sharks, dolphins, and extinct ichthyosaurs all look very similar, but these are not indicators of close evolutionary relationships, just adaptations to being a successful marine predator. Shared traits that are attributable to inheritance are called homologous, while those that evolved independently through convergent evolution are analogous. So we know that species are related to each other by different degrees. But what causes species to change and diverge? The modification part of descent with modification. There are three main processes: mutation, genetic drift, and natural selection. Mutations occur when genetic material is improperly copied or damaged by environmental factors. Mutations are random, and most either do nothing or negatively affect the organism by disrupting an important biological function. But some mutations are beneficial, creating new traits or modifying existing ones, and this creates variation in the population as the mutants pass on their traits. An example of a mutation that would generally be harmful in the wild is leucism, loss of pigmentation, such as in this peacock. But perhaps a leucistic mutant of a different animal would benefit from having less pigmentation, for example, if it lived in a snowy region. The second source of evolutionary change is genetic drift. This is a random process that occurs because there's always a luck component to reproduction. If an individual gets lucky and leaves a lot of descendants, the next generation will have a disproportionate share of its traits. Drift is particularly important in small populations, as a run of bad luck or good luck can lead to traits going extinct with no carriers, or being fixed, which means everyone has the trait. The final process of evolution is natural selection, first described by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. Unlike mutation and drift, natural selection is a strictly non-random process that occurs because different traits lead to different reproductive success. natural selection explains how the traits of animal populations change to suit their environment, a process we call adaptation. The logic of natural selection goes as follows. Firstly, there's variation within species. This means that individuals differ in their physiology, morphology, or in their behavior. Secondly, some of this variation is heritable. Offspring tend to be more similar to their parents than to other members of the population. Thirdly, many offspring are produced, but populations remain a similar size, so there's competition between individuals for resources, such as food, space, or mates. Fourthly, some variants are better at competing than others, so over time the proportion of the successful variants in the population increases. And fifthly, environments are variable, and they can change, so different variants are successful in different times and places. From this, it follows that the traits present in any population will gradually converge on whichever traits are best at surviving, competing, and reproducing in the current environment. If two populations of the same species become isolated from each other, their traits will gradually diverge, especially if their environments differ. Let's illustrate this graphically. Imagine you have a population of animals in which a mutant trait arises. The mutant conveys an advantage, so it spreads through the population with each generation, eventually becoming very common. But what if that original population was divided into two? For example, by a natural barrier such as a mountain range. If different beneficial mutants arise in each population, and then spread, the populations will gradually diverge in their traits. Natural selection is constantly optimizing traits, so under stable conditions, we expect populations to be well adapted to their environment. However, individuals within populations still vary. We use the word fitness to describe how good a particular individual's traits are at leaving descendants relative to others in the population. Fitness is defined with respect to a particular genotype or phenotype in a given environment and is measured by the relative contribution of an individual of that type to the next generation. What does all this mean for studying behavior? In short, because of the action of natural selection, we know animals will generally behave to optimize their fitness. If we want to understand them, we thus need to focus on understanding how that behavior relates to helping them survive or leave descendants. And if we want to influence their behavior, we need to use our understanding of their natural environment and how they interact with it to figure out what's likely to work.